So, if you're a regular reader of Tetrapod Zoology, you'll know that speculative biology or speculative evolution is a part of the remit. So very quickly, what is Spec Bio? It's the area of discussion and speculation that concerns living things that might evolve or might have evolved in imaginary parallel timelines on other worlds or in the future. And essentially, the entire movement in its modern version certainly kicked off in 1981 with the publication of the book After Man by author, editor, artist, model maker and visionary Dougal Dixon. And of course, Dougal's book is on sale today. After Man describes a whole swathe of creatures that inhabit the Earth 50 million years in the future, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with these creatures already, or familiar with the book already, I should say, and it has been republished within the last couple of weeks. Dougal's signing copies, as you know. After Man was hugely influential to great many people, basically spawned the Spec Bio genre. So he also introduced Gert van Dijk. Gert runs the Furahan website, which is devoted to the natural history of an alien planet. And he also runs the very popular Spec Bio blog Furahan. Am I pronouncing it correctly? Furahan? Thank you. Furahan Biology and Allied Matters, which has over the years covered an extraordinary number of issues and questions relevant to Spec Bio as a whole. And if you're seriously interested in speculative biology, you need to check both of these places on a regular basis. So, round of applause, let me introduce Dougal Dixon and Gert van Dijk. So, thank you for being here. So what we're going to do is have a kind of approximate discussion of some various themes concerning speculative biology in general. And we're going to show an excerpt from Dougal's film about the creatures of After Man. Gert is also going to give a presentation dedicated to his own work. And I'll try and keep track of the time, but I'm kind of going to play it by ear. And unless either of you would like to...
Well, I'd just like to say that speculative biology is much more widespread than we think. Because I looked at one of my granddaughter's children's books the other day, and what did I find? I found chimpanzees with tails. I found penguins living at the North Pole, and I found giraffes as depicted as forest-living animals. So speculative biology is nothing new.
Not really, although what you described sounds more like error-driven science.
So, in the interest of starting a discussion, what to people who are, I mean, like I say, most of the audience here is familiar with the concept, familiar with your works. As goes the whole area as a genre, any thoughts on what the appeal of the whole, the whole subject is? What do you think draws people in? I do think it's extraordinarily popular and becoming more so.
Well, for me, it was always the appeal of funny animals that don't actually exist but could do, and that's. For me, as a personal story, it goes back a long, long way. In fact, my fascination with dinosaurs goes back a long way, and it's and the whole thing is tied in with that. I saw my first dinosaur in a comic book, and this was back in the 1950s. And this was before dinosaurs were any part of the culture. I was only about 5-6 years old at the time, and I saw this picture of a very strange animal chasing these explorers that had distilled it in a canyon in Canada or somewhere. And I was fascinated with this, and I took the book to my father, and father explained this thing to me, of course that's correct. And he took down an ancient natural history book off the shelf. He blew the dust off it, opened it up, and here are these pictures of fossils, of animals that you just don't get anymore, and that was it. I was hooked. Went to school and tried to tell my school friends all about this new subject that I picked up. They didn't know what I was talking about. The teachers didn't know what I was talking about. Dinosaurs were just not part of the culture at that time. And all the information that I was getting was out of ancient encyclopedias and Victorian natural history books. And what I was picking up was 50 years out of date then, but there was nobody to point this out to me. So I started drawing my own dinosaurs and making additions to them and turning them into animals that never existed. And so this is where the alternative part of it came in. In fact, I think I've got a whole display of some of my early work on the table at the back there, including a sheet from a comic strip I did when I was 8 or 10 years old. It was a blatant rip-off of H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, where the narrator goes into the future and interacts with the people he finds there, but also a bit with the zoological background that he finds. And if you look at that, you'll find a lot of things that are that's what I have. But a lot of things that you will see in After Man. It goes back that far. Where am I going with this? Oh yes, I'm giving you the history. What was the? I think the message is just get out there, start imagining things, and you all have scientific training. If you're imagining it, just restrain it with scientific knowledge, and well, it's great fun.
A question to the audience, because my story is very similar to Dougal's. Who among you, very interested in zoology, has ever sat down and jotted some imaginary animals? Can you see? Wow. Other animals, put them down for a second. But this is very interesting. This is about over 90% of it. Perhaps you should ask the opposite. Who hasn't? Wow. All right. Have you seen that show of hands?
Show of hands again, please. Go on.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So the appeal is definitely here. And it is getting more widespread, I think. That was part of your question. But if you go to deviant art, or the speculative revolution form, you will see people devoting many, many hours of work and hard labor into creating their own life form. Nearly always animals. Plants are very popular in this field, I'm afraid. But somehow this doesn't seem to be picked up by mainstream media, because there is definitely lots of interest out there. And Dougal probably will also be asked very often, when is your book and green book coming out? I know this is, except for Japan, that is. And sometimes publishers don't seem to be interested, and the publishing field is difficult nowadays, but I think there's a gap there, and well, let's try to fill that one.
But it's interesting to see in the glut of science fiction movies around here these days. They're full of monsters. They're full of aliens. So it's not just contained within the scientific fraternity. People out there are inventing new animals all the time. Maybe not very plausible ones, maybe not very realistic ones, but the thought and the creativity is there. I've always thought that the humanoid alien, the human being with a funny head and speaking English as its first language, is actually a good idea, a good representation of evolution. It's evolved to live in the environment of a television studio against the selective pressures of a production budget.
Well, we could go so far as far as the languages are concerned, but most of us, many of the people who invented Klingon, for instance, and other languages, were linguists themselves. They knew what they were doing, and they invented several phrases and sounds. And you get among American actors and say Bachtlef, probably can't manage that, so it came out very simplistically. So it's the same sort of evolutionary pressure. Let's dumb this down so that the average 14-year-old American lawyer can take it on.
On the subject of aliens, I like the argument about Zeta reticulans, the grey aliens. It's been argued recently. A book by Don Prothero and a co-author, they argue that grey aliens originated from an episode of possibly The Outer Limits, which is about far future humans. and the idea that, you know, inevitably we will evolve larger eyes due to pollution and larger brains, of course, because we get smarter over time, right? And smaller mouths and spindlier limbs because we don't have to, you know, do hard work, and more pallid skin because we live indoors. So we are the grey aliens, and at least that's the argument. That's the argument where they come from.
So what we're saying here is that grey aliens are actually human beings, but time travellers. Flying saucers are time machines. These are visitors from our far future.
That is indeed the gist that they've gone for here. Changing track a little bit, it's obvious from the images we have behind us from works of both Dougal and Gert that Spec Bio is a very visual area. The concepts are brought to life by compelling, attractive, and often very, you know, fantastic, beautiful artwork, which raises the question: do you think, either of you think, that people have to be artists before they can be good at Spec Bio, or not? I mean, are there people out there, I'm wondering, we may not be familiar with them, who are, you know, writing lots of stuff and aren't illustrating it well?
If you go to the Speculative Evolution forum, you will find just that, people who write very long walls of text, which you should never do on the internet anyway. And then you find out this is very well thought out. And if you click something, the illustrations are open, and you will find out it's well, slightly less than good drawing, based on the lines on it, etc. So yes, there is that, definitely that, and all the projects there that get the attention are the ones that are illustrated well. If you want to catch people's attention, yes, you do have to do it visually, and people are sophisticated enough to, let's say, to immediately distinguish between a drawing that is fairly well done and one that is not so.
The written description actually goes back as far as H.G. Wells, the bit at the end of his time machine, his book, The Time Machine, when the protagonist was into the far future and it gets to the time where the Earth has stopped spinning around the sun, and the landscape is alive with sort of giant crabs and things with tentacles, all beautifully described, but never illustrated. And in fact, when he gets on to doing the War of the Worlds, the description of the Martian is very, very specific. But if you see the artwork that's been done for books, for the novel over the last century, the range of different renderings of Wells's description is quite large.
Then again, there are many 8-legged animals on Barsoom, or Mars as you have it. And when all these artists were facing how to make an 8-legged animal gallop, they were completely stuck. They had no idea what to do, and probably never got the idea, let's have a look at a proper 8-legged animal, because there's probably several of them in your house without now, of course, spiders. Same for 6-legged animals. And what all these artists did, they took a horse, basically, take the front 2 legs of a horse, copy that as many times as you need, and then add 2 hind legs. So it's a multiplication of front legs. That's the only way the artist knew how to do. You can't really blame them for can you expect someone who's an artist by profession, some people accept it obviously, to know enough about biology to know the proper gaze of a spider? I wouldn't think so. So they got away with, let's say, simply multiplying front legs as many times as you need and then stick onto contact. But as far as that is concerned, I'm not overly impressed with how these artists solved that particular issue. So it's basically the horse with some modifications. And the same goes for the movie Avatar, I'm sure.
Yes, the hexapodal horsey things. No questions, put your hand down. Later, Joshua. Is this what's known as centaurism? Is this centaurism? That's centaurism.
Continuing on that theme, when we did the Future is Wild about 10 years ago, one of the animals that was created, that was the mega squid. which was an elephant-sized man-living squid with graviportal legs, and we couldn't figure out how this thing walked on the 8 legs. But one of the design team was the biologist, the late Neil Alexander, who actually worked out how such a thing could move, and actually did the diagrams to give directly to the animators to get this thing to work. So it does take a lot of imagination and a lot of brain power to get this thing to work, but it needs the imagination and the brain power of somebody who really knows the subject.
We'll discuss one more area and then we'll have your talk, if that's okay. It's obvious that there's a large number of people involved in science who are interested in this field. There's a lot of it feels like it gets appropriate attention within scientific communities. You know, you think of going to a technical scientific conference and you'll find lots of people who are familiar with After Man, familiar with your works. Any thoughts on whether you think it gets appropriate and fair, friendly, warm response from the scientific community, or the opposite? Do you think it's ignored or treated with disinterest? And I'm kind of inspired in asking this when I think about paleoarts, which I think there's a huge number of paleontologists, for example, who think it's great, we need to see good paleoart, but there's also seemingly a larger number who think it's a waste of time, and that everyone who does it is an idiot. So that's a little too harsh.
My experience are fairly diverse in this respect. I once was invited to give a talk to zoologists at Wageningen University in the Netherlands, and it was a fairly similar talk, and I thought it was fairly tongue-in-cheek, and there was this stony silence in the room, and at the end someone asked in a very cold tone, how can you be certain that evolution would work this way? And then I thought, no, of course not. This is a fun project. It's supposed to be tongue-in-cheek. It's supposed to be fun, and you're taking it all seriously. Obviously, I cannot predict how evolution would go in another world that I did not have. Could you please predict how evolution will go on Earth for the next 10 million years? So, but on the whole, as long as people see the fun of it, I think then, yes, it is taken up very well. Mind you, in the science fiction community, you would expect people to jump up and all ecstatic or enthusiastic about it. And it's hardly given any attention there, which I find even also a bit odd. So somehow we've forgotten, which is very sad, really.
Whenever I am challenged like that, I always say that what I do is not a firm prediction, it's merely an exploration of possibilities. And the background to it all is that what I try to do is to give fictitious examples of factual processes. And that seems to make it valid.
So if we minimise the background presentation there and open Gert's talk. So yeah, should we move out of the way? Sorry, Dougal. So I'll pass the mic over. The talk, a very short introduction, Life on the Planet Furahan, Gert van Dijk. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I should probably warn you, this is not overly serious. This will be very short because there are announcements to do mostly discussions, so it should be about 15 minutes or shorter. What you see, what you saw there is a rust. Rust, by the way, is in joke because I'm Dutch by nature, and rups is a caterpillar. But young Dutch children find it very difficult to say the word rups, and it always comes out of rust in the beginning, so hence the word. As you can see, these are extremely large animals. They do have an endoskeleton, by the way, because there's many details behind the painting that you cannot actually see. And you would see here is a very complex system of bones and linkage systems which allows the trunk, which is not a trunk because it's a skeletal structure, to move about, rotate, extend, etc. in order to extend its reach. Why? If you've got a very large body, you don't want to move that mass all the time simply to reach more food. So many different animals have solved different ways of doing that. question of why is Furahan Earth-like? Why doesn't it take place on the planet, let's say, covered in liquid methane? For a painterly art reason. I have no idea what distance looks like on a planet with liquid methane. On Earth, you simply take out details, you take out the contrast of things in the distance, you turn it a bit blue, and everyone watching that will say that's distance. That's very easy to do. Also, I have no idea how ripples of liquid methane look like, or waves of liquid methane. So in order to focus on mechanics that I like, I simply made the planet into a very Earth-like planet. This is a spread of what I one day hope to become a book on the planet Furahan, and then you will see, perhaps to your surprise, that behind, or in front of this large Furahan animal, there is someone on a horse. Why would there be people on this particular planet? Well, I hesitated a very long time before putting people on the planet, because you all know what happens if you put people on the planet. They go to ruin, right? It only takes them a few thousand years and then you're in trouble. Then I thought, well, I shouldn't take this too personally. This is supposed to be a fun project after all. And the nice thing about humans is they provide comic relief. Humans are inherently comical if viewed from large enough a distance. So that's why there are humans. And so you have the Institute of Furahan Biology, people, sarcastic professors, stupid students, disciplines that dislike one another, etc., career people, etc. And sometimes a visiting dignitaries as the person in the middle. Does anyone recognize who that's supposed to be? Because I'm not saying it's him. David Attenborough. And I can always imagine him being there. Here we are, ladies, where we are, in the middle. And what we see is this magnificent animal. Not very good, but I hope it's close enough to get the impression. Hexapods. Now, this is a large group, and I apologize. This is and I hope you will take this personally. And if you have animals with a six-legged frame, because that's the basic frame, you can do so many things. Not as many things as you can do with a four-legged frame. One of the things you can do is take out two. Take them from the locomotor drill and do something interesting with them. In this case, you can make a predator out of them. You can make clubs out of them. Does anyone know? Can anyone guess on which types of earth animals this principle is based? Mantis shrimps. Got that right? 1 point for you. Because I thought mantis shrimps are earth animals, so one of the coolest animals on earth, and I couldn't resist to elevate them to support status. Let's go on. This are some other hexapods. These animals brachiae, meaning they were probably living in a jungle for an extraordinarily long time for these let's say, adaptations to evolve. On the left, you'll see a predator, Jaculator weissmülleri. There's also another species, Jaculator schwarzenegrii, closely related, and prey animal on the right, the baby. You can see in both cases that they have very long arms to swing from, and the other leg is very short, which they can also tuck into their bodies, which makes sense if you are swinging from, because you don't want dangling bits ruining the rhythm. And this is what these animals do. You can also create flying animals. Birds obviously had only 4 limbs to start with, so only 1 pair got transformed into limbs, into wings, sorry. But if you've got 4, you can have interesting other designs, such as this one, the depot. Spiders. Now, I really love radial symmetry. I apologize, but I really like that. And the point on Earth is there are lots of radial animals, but not really big ones, more complicated ones. So I thought there was an unmet need here, and I also wanted to see how they move. And this took a bit of programming, I can tell you. We got this to work earlier on. That's what it would work. That was the one, but in the end we did make it work somehow. Oh, that's a pity, because I've only got one video of them. I will then pass on. I apologize for that one. The thing is, if you have got an 8-legged radially symmetrical beast that can walk in any direction, you just have to turn around. And this was what the animation was for. And obviously there's adaptive radiation. You can see a few of the species there. The spotted wood rustler, scalp scarp. Try saying that a few times when you have the opportunity. And the mad sickle. The mad sickle lives in crevices among rocks, and this is why its legs actually are slanted, which is basically taken from the exact same thing. There's also flying animals with a radial body plan. In this case, it's the so-called red baron. It's a predatory animal, much like a several earth species you can imagine. This is a close-up. You can see that originally it had 8 legs, but it now has evolved, let's say, 4 of them into grasping limbs, and the other one is still used to walk on. What does that look like? Who among you has ever heard of a clap and fling mechanism? It's what many insects do. They beat their wings together over their backs, and then these peel away from one another, and this creates an area of low pressure which actually sucks the insect up. So the clap and the fling is getting the wings back from one another again. So, and this looks more or less like this. And I thought if you've got an animal with 4 wings, you can have 2 claps in one wing cycle instead of 1, as earth insects do. So this is a double clap and fling mechanism. And obviously you can do that in several different ways as well. So here's one for the red baron, which is more a helicopter type of movement. And after I worked that out, and I was quite proud of that, I thought this is pretty original. And then I found on the internet the following, that some American engineer was trying to make a winged robot and had equipped it with a double clap and fling mechanism. So that's parallel evolution for you. On the one hand, it is nice because it does prove that you can actually make something fly with this particular mechanism. Obviously, all flying animals have to get around on Earth as well, and then you do a bit more programming, and you get this somewhat odd movement. And this is the point where many people, not zoologists, say, ew, because it's a creepy, crawly thingy. Zoologists don't do that. Completely different type of animal are the goldfish, and those again are basically radially symmetrical, but they've got top and bottom anyway. And these they swim by using their fork cloaks, as they're called. And I think after learning yesterday the magic of adding sound, that there should be some sonorous music here. It should be low tones, I get the majestic feeling across that I intended only visually. I don't know whether it's working, but I hope you get the image that this is a large animal swimming ponderously along the reef, right? This one probably needs more, let's say, comical tones because it's a bit bigger. Lighting is also completely different. And somehow I get the impression after having, even though I did this myself, that this animal is fairly stupid. It probably is. So, those are some cloakies for you. Cloakfish are the only ones for which I've ever made a cutaway diagram. I won't do this ever again. Way too much work. Way too much work. But these are filter feeders, and one thing I never really understood is how that actually works. And in the cloakfish, it's not a problem because the water goes in at the front, goes out at the back, and so there's no real need to think of the middle bit, right? But I couldn't resist thinking how that actually might work. So I started looking for that, and then I realized I never understood how whales do that either. I had this primitive image of a sieve going through the water, and then after a while you've got this sieve full of stuff, and then how then you scrape that off? That was a mystery to me. And then I started reading up about it, and it doesn't work like a sieve at all. There's something called what's it called again? Cross-flow filtration, where, as you can see there, the water goes out sideways. So you hold the sieve sideways to the flow of water rather than opposite to it, and it seems to work. So this is why cloakfish have cross-flow filtration, based on real earth biology. So that's it. This is one of the Professor Andy of, let's say, Furahan University, and on behalf of the Institute of Furahan Biology, I thank you for your attention.
it's an old story that we're all familiar with. There was Darwin working away at his idea of evolution by natural selection. And unknown to him, at the other side of the world, there was Russell Wallace coming up with exactly the same thing, totally independently. I give you the modern equivalent. Furahan and the real world. At the other side of the galaxy, exactly this thing is happening. Unfortunately, I don't have a video presentation of the green world stuff. The presentation is all in a much more retro manner, in pencil and paper at the back, on the table at the back of the hall here. So anybody who hasn't seen it yet, there is my alternative evolution, alternative Earth-like planet, populated by animals evolved mostly with a radial symmetry and with 6 legs. Now on green world, it's an Earth-like planet in the Goldilocks zone around its sun, and it has the wildlife there. It's got a working ecosystem that's based on the same biochemical principles as life on Earth has, and that is why the settlers go to that planet and exploit it. But a bit of the history there is that as on Earth, life evolved in green world's oceans, and most of the animals were like starfish, six-legged starfish with a radial symmetry. The development of bilateral symmetry didn't come until that planet's equivalent to the Devonian period, when animal life came out onto land. So how this radial six-branch symmetry turns into a bilateral symmetry goes in 2 ways. Without diagrams, if you'd like to imagine a six-pointed star, and a line up the middle from one leg to another, and that is the axis of symmetry. So you've got 2 pairs of legs, a leg out the front, a leg out the back. So that's one group of animals that's developed from this. The other group has the axis of symmetry going from one leg, from the gap between one leg to the opposite gap from the other. That gives you 3 pairs of walking limbs. So everything that is developed on green world has this basic shape. But that's not what the green world story is all about. A bit like we've got the settlers getting there and mucking things up. So when I said earlier that the works that I do are intended to give fictitious examples of factual processes. What is happening in the green world is we're giving fictitious. The factual process is the interaction of human settlers on a pristine ecosystem and the mess that can make. So that is what green world is all about. So even so, other side, different parts of the galaxy, we have similar planets doing similar things.
So I'm thinking we'll now show a little bit of Dougal's movie. Do you have any preference as goes which way we look at? 30 minutes. So as some of you know, sorry.
I better introduce this. The first book that I did on these lines, which you all know, is After Man, which has just been reprinted, slightly brought up to date, and is now on sale on the way out, so don't go out the door without buying one. I'll be autographing them later. So After Man depicts possible life 50 million years in the future, once mankind has become extinct, and evolution has taken over, wiping up all the damage that human civilization has done, and re-establishing the ecosystems. Now, illustrated book, yes, big, lovely illustrations done by a series of artists. Of course, somebody's going to make a film of this someday. And who did make a film was a Japanese television company back in 1990, did a 2-hour television special on this, and actually it was quite a big thing at the time. They flew me out to the Serengeti to stand knee deep in zebras and talk about the evolution of the grass-eating animals. They flew me out to the Galapagos Islands and had me scuba diving with the marine iguanas. And then we ended up in a television studio in Tokyo, and there am I in front of a green screen. I think it was a blue screen we were using those days. But anyway, superimposition effect against a series of stop-motion animation models of these animals that I had invented. I was going to say created, that's a bad word, that I'd invented some 10 years previously. Now, I am a great fan of stop-motion animation, and I always thought that the way to bring these creations to life would be through that medium, not CGI. CGI in those days was pretty primitive, but stop motion was the way to do it. I was a little bit worried because the Japanese never had a real reputation for stop motion animation. Flat manga animation, great. Putting a guy in a rubber dinosaur costume, getting to some Tokyo debates, nobody can beat them. You know? But stop motion animation, a little bit of an unknown process. So I was up to the things. But what they came up with was very, very good, and I was very appreciative of it. Little bit cutesy, a little bit fine, but still very happy. So it is actually all on YouTube for a whole 2 hours of it. But most of it is Japanese talking heads. But there's about 20 minutes of the stop motion animation in it, which I have whittled down in the DVD that we're giving away along with the purchase of the book. So there's 20 minutes worth of what you see here, and let's go for it. A lot of it, you see this very young-looking man with hair and a dark beard. You might recognize him. But we'll just give you a minute of what it does. It doesn't matter. We're only giving you a minute of the visuals, just as a taster for what's on the DVD. Well, some effect downstairs. Or something. We don't need the sound, just the visuals that we're looking at here. Foliage. Pack.
So was that
okay, right, well, fine, well, enough of that. That's it. So what was the query there?
Was that a future elephant that you were seeing?
It was a futuristic, it was a mammal equivalent of the woodpecker. That's the sort of thing that was being here. As an extra on the DVD, there was an animated vision of what life would be like in future oceans, which had nothing at all to do with after man. It came along about 5 years later when I was commissioned to do an imagination of what life would be like at some time in the future in the ocean realm, and it was commissioned by Panasonic from their headquarters in Osaka. So there's about 5 minutes of that as well on the DVD. So that's just a plug for the book, which is on sale.
So if we all three of us go back onto the stage and we'll continue for the remainder of the slots. I apologise for the sound not playing. I'm going to have to check whether other presentations are okay, because I thought everything would just work out through the HDMI and plug in. And we'll stop with a couple of minutes to spare for questions at the end, assuming that is okay with both of you two. So, again, I just feel as if my questions kind of overlap things I've already said, so thank you for that, Gert. I mean, do you feel as if there is a Spec Bio community these days that you get feedback from and backing from? Among the slides, again, we've got pictures from the WorldCon meeting that we all attended in 2014, where we had what was essentially a Spec Bio convention. And my recollection, which may be through rosy-tinted glasses, but not literally, was that we had a really substantial turnout, a packed room and lots of people there who wanted to talk to you. Which it makes it obvious there's a really interested community that's looking for some kind of reason to come together. Obviously, Dougal recently was selling Afterman at the Conway Hall event, a book launch. Dougal and I spoke on stage, and again, that was extremely well attended. That was over 215 people for one evening. So, any thoughts on the community and whether you get appropriate engagement and support you think you should get? Any thinkings on that?
In my case, most of the, let's say, exposure is through the internet, and I'm often very much impressed by the level of knowledge that my commenters make on some of my blog posts. Several of the people here in the audience right now, by the way. And sometimes I think this is a lot better than my idea originally was, and in several cases I've taken those suggestions along and designed a new subspecies. So yes, there are quite a few people out there, but I don't know how many there are, whether it would be easy to get them together. That might be difficulties, so this is why I think occasions such as this one, or a science fiction convention, would be suitable. Mind you, we're trying for next year's WorldCon in Dublin, which is not that far away.
No, just I agree with Gert. I get all sorts of fan email many of them saying, why don't we invent something like this? Why not create something like that? So we respond, yeah, you run with it. Let's see what you can come up with. But never do.
So there are both, I think, fair and unfair criticisms of any Spec Bio project, and sometimes of specific organisms that are incorporated within various canons. What are your thoughts on those criticisms? Are they a necessary part of the process, or are they from people who completely miss the point?
Well, it shows that we've sparked some thought on the subject, and turn somebody's mind to something that they hadn't even considered before. So even that is an achievement of sorts.
What you see happening now is that people do not take the admittedly pretty short history of speculative evolution into consideration. I've noticed, for instance, on the Speculative Evolution forum that people have been writing some very uncommon things about some of Dougal's animals, and which are completely unfair, I thought, because in their perspective, probably the perspective of someone from 17 to 24, because that's their age slot, so to speak, this looks as if this has been done before. But what they don't realize is that at one time, many of these inventions were completely novel. For instance, a bat that has gone back to a terrestrial mode of life is now in that particular community considered boring. Can you imagine? Anyway, but they say, well, this has been done before, so, and they take the criticism that should be addressed to people who come up with the idea now, and they also address it that person who came up with the idea for the very first time, which happened to be Dougal. So you see that happening, and there's also, as in all forums, there's this group of people who consider themselves to be the core, etc. I'm going to ignore this one, and simply wait for someone to say something which is really interesting. And there's lots of those, so it's not a big problem.
And I'll finish by just asking what's next as goes your own projects. I mean, there's clear indications that you're working on a book. There's clear indications you've got a book that needs to be translated into English at some point. I just thought we should finish by Either of you commenting briefly on those? We have, of course, a green world model here on stage with us. So,
Dougal has much more experience with publishing books than I have. My total number of published books so far is exactly 0, so I don't really know how to do this. But what I have been to several publishers in France as well, because that's this type of thing is very popular in France. This probably has to do with the monde dessiné comics as they are known there. Even there people say, well, these projects are very expensive to publish, all color throughout, etc., and probably very small print runs. So that's probably a very big problem. But if there is a publisher here who says, well, I can make this work, I'm open for suggestion.
The problem with publishers back when I worked as an editor for publishing houses is that they're reluctant to touch anything unless there's 6 books from other publishers on that very same subject, so that they need to know how that subject is going to perform in the marketplace, and very reluctant to go into something new, something speculative, because it doesn't have any what am I saying? Any history of success that they can build upon.
okay, well, we'll just finish with 1 or 2 questions. Those will be quite brief because we need to wrap up in a second. So, if I could please ask anyone who wants a question, we'll only take 1 or 2, stand up and broadcast. And Joshua, you put your hand up, so you can first.
There was actually no questions.
Well, what a waste of time. We'll take 1 other question now that I feel committed to this process. And I see someone there. Yes, please.
Stand up or?
Yeah, please. Yeah, just so everyone can hear you. So.
Hi. I've done speculative biology stuff myself. It's great, both great inspiration. When you're working on these kind of massive projects, do you ever feel like halfway you just want to change everything? You get better ideas for structures and morphology?
Well, I did that. I have very little time to spend on this, so I've got about 60 oil paintings somewhere in the cupboard, and back around 2010, 2011, I thought, well, these are behind the times, so I have to make the switch to digital painting. So I redid some of them. So yes, you could say that the project has switched halfway. The rest of them, you could say, well, it's more of an evolution than a revolution. The hexapods will, as they approach, if ever they will be published, a little different than they do now, because I'm beginning to find them boring. That's not good.
So I haven't experienced this. When I came up with the idea of Arthur Mann and took it to a publisher, as I say, I was actually working in publishing in those days, and I knew of the actual techniques to use to present a crazy idea like this to a publisher who, to give the impression that it was a scheme that had legs, that it would actually work. In fact, that's one of the things that I brought for display in the back of the room there. So when I went to the publisher, it was almost a complete thing in itself, without any alteration from the original concept. Yeah, I can't say I've actually experienced anything that our speaker was actually questioning us about. No.
Thank you. Okay, well, we're going to stop there. But let me remind you that Dougal has brought a huge amount of initial concept art and initial spreads, prototype versions of what became the books, as well as the Japanese editions of 2 volumes of Green World. Back table there, if you haven't looked at it already, you must. This is almost a world exclusive. And of course, Dougal is also, well, I said it because we had it at the Conway Hall. There's 2 or 3 people here who went to that. And of course, Dougal is also signing and selling with the Breakdown Press people copies of the new edition of After Man near the front door. What we're going to do now is Aaron Ra is signing and selling his Foundational Falsehoods of Creationism book. So as soon as we get off the stage, please feel free to come down and buy a copy of that from Aaron. It's £20. And we are then going to give prizes for the Paleo Art Workshop, which John is in charge of, allegedly. And then it's coffee break, and then we'll start at 3:30. That's me. But thank you. Please round of applause. Dougal Dixon and Gert van Dijk.